Greetings, CinemaBlen fans, and welcome to HeroBlend number 165. I'm your host, event editor Eric Eisenberg, and after many weeks of talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and X-Men and Deadpool, I am very excited this week to finally be talking about the DC Extended Universe, because to be honest, we've been kind of short on content to talk about in this arena recently, mostly because there haven't been really any DCEU movies kind of going on. So, obviously, we have Aquaman that's going to be coming in December. We have Shazam, which is currently in production, and it looks like it's going to be coming out next year. But other than that, we have not heard too many developments about what's been going on until really this week. And it really, the news that we heard this week really kind of solidifies what appears to be a certain vision for the DC Extended Universe going forward, and frankly, given everything that we've heard, it kind of seems like it all comes down to this little lady. Wonder Woman was obviously an incredibly important milestone film for the DC Extended Universe. It's by far the best film that they've made so far, and we have seen a hell of a lot of women power just enter the DC Extended Universe, not only this week, but also within recent weeks and going back to last month. And so to kind of just give a quick rundown of all of that, you have the news that Ava DuVernay, who directed Wrinkle in Time and Selma, is now attached to direct a New Gods movie based on the comics by Jack Kirby. You have the news that Birds of Prey is moving into further development, starring Harley Quinn and potentially Batgirl, being directed by Cathy, who is a new upcoming filmmaker, just made her first feature that just premiered at the Sundance Film Festival back in January. She apparently got on the radar of Warner Brothers in a big way and is now set to direct the Birds of Prey movie. And then you have the developing Batgirl film, which is being written by this woman named Christina Hodson, who is actually also writing the Birds of Prey movie. And that movie is very quickly moving into development, and as I mentioned before, the idea is kind of, this has been, there's a suggestion from a reporter at Variety that essentially what Birds of Prey will do is introduce a DC Extended Universe version of Barbara Gordon, and then kind of spin her off into a solo Batgirl movie. And obviously, this is an incredibly exciting development, just because women have not necessarily been at the forefront of this genre to date. In fact, the number of female-fronted comic book movies can be counted on one hand, and pretty much only one of them is actually any good. So this is actually a huge thing for the development of the DC Extended Universe, and could be a very real sign of kind of the directions that they are moving in. So I want to kind of open up this entire conversation to talking about what we can expect from the DC Extended Universe from this point forward, how you feel about potentially more female-centric heroes getting the spotlight. So hit the comment section below. But in the meantime, I will just kind of talk a bit about what to expect from these projects, because obviously people know Superman, they know Batman, they know Justice League, they know even know Aquaman to a certain degree. But I'd say that it's pretty much limited to DC fans of the comics specifically, really. Maybe the animated shows as well. That you kind of get an idea of what New Gods are, who Batgirl is, and who the Birds of Prey are. So to kind of start with just a dime store version of what the New Gods are, it's because, mind you, it is incredibly it's ambitious. It's a big thing. So essentially what it was a creation by Jack Kirby, who actually many of you probably know as more for his work for Marvel, kind of helping to found that company alongside Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. But when he moved over to DC, he created this incredibly ambitious cosmic universe, essentially, known as what was partially called New Gods, but also known as the Fourth World, which actually you can see right up there. And essentially what it is it's centered on two different worlds. You have a world called New Genesis, and you have a world called Apocalypse. They used to be part of one bigger world that used to exist during the time of the Old Gods. There was a Ragnarok type event. They split into two worlds, and now you have the Age of the New Gods. So on New Genesis, you have the leader who's known as Highfather. He is kind of a Zeus, Odin-esque figure who rules peacefully. It's an incredibly beautiful and idyllic planet, and absolutely stunning. Unfortunately, on the other side, you have Apocalypse, which, if you can't already kind of tell by its name, not the nicest of places, and it's ruled over by this tyrant known as Darkseid, who, if you can remember Justice League and his one little name drop in there, Darkseid is mentioned as the guy who's kind of calling the shots for Steppenwolf. Apparently, Steppenwolf was going to Earth to collect all the mother boxes for Darkseid. wasn't really something that was fully developed in Justice League. Honestly, something that really kind of derailed the movie and made it not so great. But presumably a New Gods movie will be the movie that really gives Darkseid his opportunity to kind of shine. So, again, you have Darkseid, who is this tyrannical asshole who is constantly in search for what's called the anti-life equation, which allows him to essentially gain control over any sentient beings. And he is constantly on the hunt for this domination, and obviously New Genesis is kind of a target of his. So they wind up making a deal, Darkseid and Highfather, where they actually exchange sons. They decide to adopt one another's children, so that the idea is they can create a peace, knowing that they wouldn't attack the other planet and destroy each other. So Darkseid's son is this guy named Orion, who winds up being raised by Highfather. It's kind of a rageaholic. He's kind of an angry dude, as you would be if you were part of the genetic line of Darkseid, but he learns how to, with the help from Highfather, he learns how to kind of control that rage, kind of control it and direct it, winds up becoming an incredibly powerful warrior fighting for New Genesis. On the other side, unfortunately, and this is kind of a terrible thing, you have Highfather's son, who's this guy named Scott Free. Kind of a terrible name, admittedly. But he's raised in Apocalypse. He doesn't know that he is Highfather's son, which honestly, that would probably fill him with a lot of resentment if he did. And he was actually raised in what's known as one of their terror orphanages, which is pretty much exactly what you expect it to be. It's these groups that are run by this woman named Granny Goodness, who definitely is not anything like her namesake. She is absolutely terrible. And so Scott is raised in this horrific environment, not knowing his true lineage and not knowing that he is one of the New Gods. He winds up kind of joining a rebellion against Darkseid, winds up hooking up with this woman named Big Barda, who is the leader of the Female Fury Brigade. Actually, that is her picture right there. She is an incredibly badass female warrior who is originally loyal to Darkseid, but through her love because of her relationship with Scott, she kind of learns that there's a bit more to it and decides to rebel herself. Eventually, Scott escapes from Apocalypse. He actually travels to Earth, where he meets up with this escape artist, becomes a hero known as Miracle Man. I'm sorry, not Miracle Man, Mr. Miracle. Miracle Man's a different person. He becomes Mr. Miracle, but unfortunately, because he leaves Earth, that winds up breaking the code between that exists between Apocalypse and New Genesis, so it kind of gives Darkseid the ability to launch into all-out war. Obviously, this is a huge, kind of big, it's a decade-spanning sci-fi fantasy adventure. It would be incredibly cool to see it brought to life. Honestly, one of the coolest things about it, and to kind of just lead into what I was talking about with the kind of female-fronted voices of the potential growing DC Extended Universe, Big Barda could easily become one of the new forefront heroes for this universe. If not just because partially, if you really look at her relationship with Scott Free, she is the heavy hitter. She is like the big, she is the true warrior. She's kind of to borrow the word, she's kind of the more masculine. And so just kind of have that energy kind of going forward would be great. And obviously, Ava DuVernay kind of dipped her toe into the world of bigger blockbusters when she worked with Disney on Wrinkle in Time. Not the greatest results, if we're being perfectly honest. It kind of, the movie was, I'd say, mediocre, and it kind of faded a little bit fast from box office. It definitely was not the biggest success in the world. However, it's exciting because Selma is a fantastic film and an unbelievable directorial debut. I think Ava DuVernay has a ton of talent, and I am very excited to see what she can do. And kind of bridging from there, let's talk about Birds of Prey a bit, because Cathy Yan is certainly not a household name. As I mentioned earlier, she just made her feature directorial debut at Sundance with a movie called, let me look this up, Dead Pigs, which apparently, again, I have not seen the movie yet, but it's apparently kind of this ensemble comedy drama set in Shanghai that involves it's actually based on a true story about this kind of river full of thousands of dead pigs that start flowing towards modernizing Shanghai, and it sounds like this really weird story. I really don't know what to make of it really all that much. However, I think the real takeaway from it is just the fact that the DC Universe is now willing to take willing to hand over one of these major projects that certainly will be very, very important in the development of the DC Extended Universe right now, because if we're being fully honest, it's kind of on shaky ground. But they are now kind of almost looking towards more what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is doing. Not only the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we've seen a lot of indie directors kind of go from making their first movie to making a major blockbuster. The first one that kind of comes to mind is Colin Trevorrow, who went from making, I'm totally blanking on the name of that cute little time travel movie onto Jurassic World. You had Gareth Edwards, who went from his movie Monsters to making Godzilla, and then onto Rogue One. So it's kind of cool that the DC Extended Universe, while they have mostly been focusing on mainstream filmmakers like Zack Snyder and David Ayer and James Wan, it's now looking like they are kind of branching out and kind of looking for these more independent voices. As far as what we can expect from the Birds of Prey story, for those who don't know, it's a group that was started back, I believe, in the mid-90s, involving Oracle, who is Barbara Gordon when she was paralyzed shortly after The Killing Joke, which is the story famously by Alan Moore, which resulted in the Joker shooting and paralyzing Barbara Gordon, though it even kind of appeared that he killed her at first. It also involves Black Canary, who's a character that many fans may recognize from Arrow, as she had that supersonic vocal power. There's Huntress, who is she's a ace with a bow and arrow, and Lady Blackhawk, who is kind of an ace pilot. One thing that is changing about this movie is the fact that it's apparently being used as a Harley Quinn vehicle, which is an interesting development for it, if not just because her connection to the Birds of Prey is not all that solid. There was a show that actually, a completely failed show that came out back in 2002 that really, nobody cared about, and she was part of that group, but it is kind of a contrast, and interestingly, it should create a certain conflict between Batgirl and Harley Quinn, because, I mean, Barbara Gordon, if they go with the Oracle version of Barbara Gordon to start in the DC Extended Universe, she's probably not going to be a huge fan of the fact that Harley Quinn has this loving relationship with the Joker, aka the guy that paralyzed her. Obviously, that is kind of an interesting thing. The idea that you could potentially introduce Batgirl as a paraplegic character within the DC Extended Universe, and then move on to Batgirl, which is the solo movie that we've actually been hearing about for quite a while now, because originally it was being developed by Joss Whedon, and unfortunately, I think it was a couple months ago, he basically came forward and said, I don't have an idea of what to do with this character. This isn't something I can do. So he kind of broke ties. That left the door open for Christina Hodson, who I mentioned earlier. The screenplay, her track record, admittedly, is not great so far. It includes the Rosario Dawson, Katherine Heigl movie, Unforgettable, that came out last year as kind of a romantic thriller kind of thing, just kind of Fatal Attraction-y. But that, unfortunately, was ultimately forgettable. I apologize for the pun. But the larger point is that she is now bringing her voice to Batgirl, and frankly, there is a lot of potential in a Batgirl movie, especially if you kind of adapt the character that was really introduced within the New 52, which was a character who, when she became a hero, was kind of was recovering from her being a paraplegic. She became a hero, but she was also suffering from PTSD, which, is kind of an issue as a hero, and that would be great to see. We kind of got a taste of it in a little bit in Iron Man 3 when Tony Stark was dealing with PTSD after the events of the Avengers, but it's a potential. I think there's a lot of potential in a Batgirl movie, and I'm very excited to see what filmmaker they eventually get for that job. Unfortunately, we are out of time now, though I will say this is not the end of the conversation, because as I mentioned last week, we have now launched a HeroBlend podcast that will be essentially an extension of this live show, and I'll be recording this afternoon with my co-host Adrienne Jones. It will be live tomorrow morning on iTunes, so be sure to check it out there. Continue leaving comments because in the comment section, because we will address them and talk about what you guys want to talk about, and of course, we will always be back on this live show here on CinemaBlen Facebook page at 1 p.m. PST, 4 p.m. EST, and I will, just as a quick tease, I'm very excited for next week's episode because it is going to be a full-blown spoiler review of Avengers Infinity War, which obviously one of the most anticipated movies in the entire universe. Very excited for that, so please stay tuned, listen to the podcast tomorrow, and of course, join us next time. Hope you have a good one.